All right, so welcome for those of you who are tuning into the recording of Demonstrated Interest Crash Course, College Visits, Do's and Don'ts. I'm Tom, joined with Morgan and Jay. I'm here to walk you through our juicy session today. So some housekeeping items just to get going. This session is being recorded, as we just saw. So no need to panic and, send in emails being like, I missed the recording, like I missed live, my Zoom was acting up. Don't worry, you'll get it as a follow-up email if you registered for the session, as well as the slides and the info that we share during the presentation today too. So you'll get all the goods. If you need captions, they should be available on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. And they also do have some auto-generated captions in different languages. So if you would prefer that, you can go give that a try. No promises that it's going to be 100% accurate. It is AI. Questions. We love questions and we love making these sessions as relevant to those who are tuning in as possible. So if you want to go ahead and use the Q&A box in your Zoom webinar screen, again, it should be at the control panel at the bottom of your screen. That's a way for you to ask any questions that come up throughout the session. When one of us is not speaking, we'll kind of keep an eye on that Q&A box and answer as many as we can. And then we'll also answer some live towards the end of the session. A lot of times we stay on after the hour just to answer a few more questions. We go 15 minutes after. You don't have to stay for that, of course. You can leave whenever you want. You are a free human to do as you please. But we do love hanging out a little longer and giving you those goods. This is just a plug for, I'm not sure how you found out about this webinar. Most likely it was from one of our email advertisements, just letting you know about some upcoming events that we have. But sometimes a lot of people don't know that we have a really robust upcoming live events webpage that includes a calendar of all the events that we have, when they're happening. And you can also add a calendar kind of upload to your Apple Calendar or Google Calendar if you want to kind of stay in the know with all of our events going forward. So this is regularly updated by our operations team. And if you're a College Essay Guy super fan, which we hope you are, and if you're not, maybe at the end of this session, you will be. This is a great way to kind of stay in the know with all the things that we're doing because it is a lot. Speaking of a lot, here's our agenda today. So this may look familiar to you if you saw the email advertisement for the session. But essentially, Morgan's going to start things off talking about just demonstrated interest, what that term means, and how it folds into your college process, and how it arguably is one of the lower lift, in my opinion, easier ways to stand out in the college process than some of the other less controllable factors. I'll talk a little bit about how which colleges demonstrate interest and which ones don't, or which ones fold them in or have it be part of their process. Jay's going to talk a little bit about virtual demonstrated interest, which I would say is kind of a good foot in the door, before planning a big old college tour and investing time and money and seeing places. It's a great way to start to get exposure to colleges and get that ball rolling. Morgan's going to talk about building authentic relationships with admissions officers, which as former admissions officers ourselves, we can lean on personal anecdotes for that. Common mistakes, something that I love to talk about. I love talking about the negative, which is funny because I like to think I'm kind of positive. But I love debunking myths and missteps that I see people taking when it comes to planning college tours, planning college visits. And then we'll wrap things up with formal versus informal college tours and some tips about essay writing and how to use these experiences, the ways that you've learned about these colleges to put your application in the best light it can be put in. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic over to Morgan, who's going to kick things off for us.
Hey, and just, pray with me that the puppy doesn't bark too much and you'll be my favorite audience of all time. All right, so I'm going to kick this section off with a quick poll just to sort of give everyone a moment of interaction. We've got a couple of questions built in tonight. So this one relates to the section I'm going to talk about, which is demonstrated interest. And so the question for you to answer here is that, do you think that adding a school to your Common App counts as demonstrated interest? Just give you a second to answer. Yes and no. Okay. Good job, participants. We love this engagement. All right, it's hard to watch it live. I'm like, oh, we're leading no. Okay, I think we can call it there. No, the incremental movement. Great. So I can see that more people are leaning towards no, that adding a school does not count. And actually, if we're being honest, this might be a little bit of a trick question because this idea that counting sort of is asking the question of how, assuming that it affects your admission or would move the needle on the way that you were read. And so the answer I think that I'm going to put forth here today is that it can sort of count. but not in the traditional ways that you might think of. And so what we know about the Common App is that when you add a college to your college list in Common App, or your child or your client, depending on who's here tonight, that colleges can see that they are on your list. They can't see the other schools on your list, which is great from an ethical boundary standpoint, but they can see that you are have added them to your list. And this, I have worked with students where we've sort of seen some connection between adding a school to their list and then communications received from the colleges, including program invitations. So it's a kind of like a low-key passive way to do it. But if you're a junior right now and you make your Common App account, go ahead and add some schools to your list and see what happens. I think it's a neat way to test that. Okay, so jumping in here to the content to describe demonstrated interest. This is one of those things in one of those fields. Like I've been in college admissions or this field since 2001. So it's a long time. And I think sometimes I can forget like what is common to me and known versus what is new to families. So we're just going to break this down here with the definition. So just to so we're all on the same page, that demonstrated interest, we often refer to this as like DI, if we're like using shorthand or in blog posts or things. So it's actions that just show a school you're interested. And it can give them the feeling or the impression that they are more likely to enroll you if you are admitted. This is important because colleges all have enrollment goals. This helps them pay their bills and bring in a full class, which makes everybody from an academic and housing side happy. And then for yield protection, I'll work with some families who think about yield or students who are like, is that yield protection? Which is kind of like an insider's way of saying that schools want to admit as few students as possible to enroll their full class. So there are some colleges where you have to admit 8 students for every one who will say yes and enroll. And the more that you're admitting, the higher your acceptance rate is going to be. So I don't know what the actual number is. Harvard probably admits like 1.2% or something like 1.2 people per enrollment. So they're enrolling at a really high level. So their yield is really good. So their acceptance rate goes down. And when I explain this to students, I often say, when they have to admit fewer people to fill their class, they're more selective, admit rate goes down, more people want it. And it just becomes this sort of cycle that is part of the reason why so many schools are more, more selective today than they were 10 or 20 years ago. All right, on to the next one. Why does it matter? So in NACAC is our governing body for college admissions, and they do a survey with a lot of frequency around like what are the most important factors to admissions or enrollment managers. And you can see here that interest ranked number 6. And so this is a fairly long list of factors that could be considered, and it's pretty high up there. So yes, it boosts admission chances, whether it's something where you go to see a college rep off-site, like at a college fair, or if you're visiting campus and you have a contact point with somebody. Those are all helpful ways to show interest. And yeah, I think we talked about this earlier, but just like it helps colleges, hitting enrollment targets is really important. So if they think that you're likely to enroll, it's really helpful. And I could say like there were days and times when you could be a stealth applicant, so having had very little contact with a college and still be admitted. And it's not that that can't happen anymore in this day, but the difference is that it's more severe and more skewed the more selective the institution is. And so if you were thinking about schools that admit, say, well, I don't know, like 60, 70, 80% of their applicants, it matters a little bit less than schools that admit 30, 20, 10%. They use it in different ways, but it's important to understand it helps with enrollment goals. All right, so this next 2 slides are going to just be 10 ways to show demonstrated interest. So if you're a parent and you're thinking like, what should my child be doing? What are maybe some good habits to build or things for them to do over the upcoming summer? Here's a few ideas on the next 2 slides. Joining email lists is like pretty easy and passive, and a good thing to do just to make sure you're on their radar. That is one initial way to help make sure you're not a stealth applicant. Clicking on email links, it feels a little bit silly to me to say this because it just does, because at the time that I went to high school and the age of that. But now it is important for students, if schools of interest are emailing you, to click on links in the emails. And not to just like blindly go through that and spend excessive amounts of time, but it's a way that they're tracking, did you engage with the message that they sent to you? Sometimes they can also track, like, if you've applied and they've sent you reminders your file's incomplete. I've talked to admissions reps before where they're like, yeah, well, we emailed them 3 times on these dates, and I can tell that they saw the email but didn't click on anything. And so there is that like deeper look at it. Let's see, clicking deep into websites and exploring programs, attending college fairs, and I'm going to come back to the applying early decision, early action on my last slide on this section. So we'll skip that for now. Okay, so contacting regional reps is kind of in like you could kind of put that with the same type of category as going to a college fair. Usually the local rep, the regional rep, is the person who'd be at the college fair. Sometimes it helps to follow up to them with an email or just a question that you might have about their school. It helps if the question that you ask them is like a specific question that's personal to you or something you can't find on the website easily, or maybe you can't find it easily on ChatGPT or something like that. Following social media can be a good idea. You just want to be cautious about, if they're following you back and things like that, that you're, making good choices on social media. Visiting campus, of course, is a huge, obvious way to show interest. Interviewing has become less of a part of the admissions process. Definitely, I see it year over year. My students are interviewing less and less. But if you have the option, you always want to opt in. I would say in like almost every situation. Every now and then there are students where interviewing maybe wouldn't put their best forward, and you want to be cautious about that. But generally, you want to say yes to the interview option. And then writing compelling why us essays. So the why us essays are kind of what we talk about as those supplemental essays where they're saying, why do you want to come to our school? What is it about our school that makes it attractive or a good fit for you? So that's also, visiting can help you craft those essays, and writing good essays that show you know the place can really be a nice way to show interest. All right, and my last slide on this section is about early decision. And so this goes back to the previous point that I skipped over about applying early action and early decision as ways to show interest to colleges. And you can see here the example for American University. When you apply ED versus regular decision, you can see what the difference is in the acceptance rate. And if you love American and you know it's your first choice, you can see the clear path here that you'd much rather be in an 85% acceptance rate than a 35. And we often talk about early decision. Like there are a lot of colleges that have early decision that are highly selective, that say they don't consider demonstrated interest, but they have ED, right? And so in those cases, we talk about that as early decision as being the ultimate form of demonstrated interest, because there's nothing more committed than making a binding early decision commitment to say, if you admit me, I will come. Because back to the point about yield rates, that's a 1-for-1 ratio for the college. For every one they admit, one enrolls, and ED helps them maintain more control over, their enrollment targets. So I'm going to leave it there and let us move on to our next section, and I'll be back in a little bit.
Yeah, so my background, I really like doing this section because I think it's important for families to understand where to channel their energy when it comes to demonstrated interest, right? Because oftentimes I'll talk to a student and I'll ask, like, what are the schools that you're the most excited about? And they'll give me a list. And oftentimes it tends to be like what I call very highly rejective schools, ones where, the admit rate is 4%, or what I like to say, the rejection rate is 96% of people get no's. I think even sometimes just like flipping the language there is important to help that sink in. So in general, as someone who has worked at 2 different institutions I'm going to do a little poll previously before launching into this point. As someone who has worked at 2 different institutions of varying selectivity, Holy Cross, my alma mater, which was my first admissions job, does factor in demonstrated interest. And it is a more selective college. At the time I was there, it was between 30 to 40%. But for just a lot of factors there and a lot of reasons, Holy Cross really did value students, especially more local students, because it was a more regional school. There were a lot of like students from Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, who really wanted to go there. But also many who like it wasn't the top choice on their list per se. A lot of times it was Boston College or like other schools. So having students who did interviews and visited campus, we were very explicit with students and families that like this will give you a leg up. It wasn't this like secret hidden thing that we were trying to hold back that, oh, only the students who really go out of their way are going to stand out to us. Colleges are usually pretty transparent about whether or not they factor in demonstrated interest. At Pomona, the second school that I worked at, things got a little more selective, or a lot more selective, depending on your definition. The admit rate at Pomona was less than 10%. And for me, it was interesting moving from a school where students who did interviews, did tours, were given a real clear leg up that was factored into the admissions conversation, in the notes for the student files, in committee conversations. But at Pomona, it was not something that came up. We had tools like with our application management system called Slate, where we could theoretically go and dig and see if they had been on our website and clicking around and opening our emails, but it wasn't actually something that we folded into our decision-making process. And we really stuck to that. So just from my experience, colleges are really transparent about demonstrated interest. It's something that like in this process where arguably there's a little bit more opaque, mysterious things that certain colleges are doing. This is one where I'd say schools are pretty front and center. There's not a lot of like ambiguity about their stance on this. And all it takes is really looking it up yourself, researching it, and asking. Before I launch into that, I did want to do another poll, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind. So this kind of relates to a little bit of what Morgan shared before. Actually, not this one about the college tours. Could you do the one about the factors? Okay, you should see it up now. It says, which of the following application components are considered less important by most colleges than demonstrated interest? So I'm curious to see if people can see this poll here and sort of find, okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, just give a little bit of time for people to answer. So it looks like it's a pretty even split. Again, it's kind of funny to see the bars kind of moving and swaying. But this is a little bit of a trick question because the answer is all of them, according to the NACAC data that Morgan mentioned before. This is what the data actually looks like in terms of a chart form. So it shows you kind of essentially across the board at a range of colleges and universities. In this case, the sampling of colleges is 185 different schools, varying size, selectivity, type. And it's pretty much, I'd say, the industry standard of giving students and families, counselors, a sense of what colleges value most. And of course, the real caveat here, right, is it depends. Every college has different stance on how they factor in these different components. But this just gives you, I'd say, a good baseline of where to channel your energy at the time that you're entering into the college cycle and journey, right? So if you're a junior who's wrapping up their junior year in high school right now, a lot of the components that you see that are the top factors that, have a lot of math on their side here, the GPA, the course strength, the curriculum, those are things that you don't arguably have as much control over at this stage, right? So all the sections kind of in this green box, essay writing, showing your positive character attributes to colleges, and showing interest in schools where it makes a difference, really do move the needle, and is a significant part of the way that colleges run their operation. So I think it's just really kind of good to be aware that this is a really actionable way to be spending your time. So again, just to kind of zoom in on that particular line of colleges that measure interest, it is most colleges and universities that are factoring it into some degree. I worked at an exception to this number, right? I worked at one of the 30% of schools that don't look into it at all, Pomona. And I would say in general, the more selective a school becomes, typically the less and less demonstrated interest is going to really help you out. So I have a phrase that I often call love your likelies, meaning that there might be likely or target schools that are on your college list that they're there for whatever reason, right? And ideally, you're identifying likely and target schools that have things about them that you're excited about. But those are usually the schools that you need to show a little more love to, because typically their enrollment process and the business side of their operation does require students who are more interested and is going to give more preference to those interested students who have those documented touch points with their school. And this doesn't mean that you had a really cool conversation with your cousin who attends there, and that doesn't count as demonstrated interest, because again, it needs to be measured and tracked, and factored in by the college or university. So something to keep in mind. Um, and really easy to find this out, especially just with the internet at your disposal. It takes an easy, quick Google search or ChatGPT or whatever you'd like to use at this point. Maybe a lot of times I know students use TikTok. I personally would not recommend that, but all you have to do is ask, does the school measure demonstrated interest? Or you can also look it up on what's called their common data set. That actually, it will kind of give you a chart like this one here that we showed about the NACAC report with all these different application components. It will actually show you the college's individual specific answers for these questions, basically. So that's a really good way for you to get a sense of if a school measures it or not. A general rule of thumb, again, is that the more selective a school is, the less demonstrated interest is going to really fling doors open for you with their process. But there are exceptions to that. For example, Pitzer College, one of the Claremont colleges that I worked really closely with in my time in admissions, they were the one Claremont college out of the 5 undergraduate schools. We all were one like consortium together that measured demonstrated interest. So students there who didn't engage with them were definitely at a disadvantage. So doing your research, making sure that you know which schools to channel that time and effort and energy towards is a great practice.
All right. Next, I'm going to go over virtual opportunities that students are using to demonstrate interest in a school. And it's important to know in the virtual setting what is considered demonstrated interest and what isn't. So I'm going to first start with talking about how to make virtual college research effective, kind of like the girl on our left today, sorry, on the right, where she has 10 monitor screens researching different schools. The reality is actually students are probably more likely on their phones or on their laptops researching universities that way. So the most effective way that a lot of students are learning about a university is through virtual college tours. So this could be done on a couple websites like UVisit, Campus Reel, or even the university's website where they have pre-recorded videos or 3D models of their campus where students can walk around, learn about different buildings, and learn about the school that way. There's also like YouTube videos and other social medias that students can follow as well that have tour guides showing students around the student campus. Next is also to get a student's perspective on the campus. So websites like Go, Induct, Student Crowd, What Uni have information on the student's perspective and their reviews about the universities where students can talk about their experiences there, the good, the bad, the things that the university website might not put on the universities might not put on their website. It's also important to learn about the local surrounding areas. Some students might be concerned about the safety of the campus. So taking a quick Google map search on the surrounding areas could be important. Students are also not going to be spending 100% of their time on campus. A lot of them are going to be, going elsewhere. So it might be important to see what else is around the area that the students can do and visit and see. Students might also want to check the transportation system around campus. Are there buses? Are there transit systems that allow students to travel around the city? How easy or hard is it to go from the campus to an airport? Because students might want to go back home or visit other areas while they're studying. And then finally, for students who already have a major in mind, it's really important for them to actually go onto that department's website and learn more about it. Things like the classes that are offered, what professors are being taught there. There could be groundbreaking news or research that are happening on that campus, and it's important to know about that through the school's department website. Now you might be wondering what counts and what doesn't count as a demonstrated interest. So as we mentioned, if you take a virtual tour on the school's website or join one of the information sessions, those count because the schools will be asking for your information, your name, your last name, your email address, and tracking that information. If you have any email interactions with an admission rep, after they visit your school or you attend a college fair, or you just Google who your admission rep is online and have any interactions with them through email, those are being tracked. As we mentioned before, you might want to join a college's mailing list. And if they send you any emails, they're checking to see, did you open that or did you delete that right away or didn't even bother opening that? And then in the emails that you do open, there are going to be links there inviting you to a webinar or inviting you to their website about this groundbreaking news that happened. They'll be tracking that as well to see if you clicked the links. And then there are also colleges that will track the amount of time that you spent on the website. So one of our students, really was interested in the bio department on a college's website and spent 48 hours researching, the different classes, the different opportunities, the different clubs there. And that really shows the colleges that the student really cared because they spent, more than a day on the website digging for more information about the school and the program itself. Now you might be wondering what doesn't count for demonstrated interest. And the first is if you mass email a bunch of colleges some generic questions. So like you have one email open and you CC or just email a bunch of different college reps, that's not going to count because the colleges know like you're just mass emailing a bunch of people. You're not really demonstrating an interest for a particular school. If you ask a rep or the colleges any generic question that you can easily find online or through ChatGPT, that's also not really showing interest. Like if you just ask what is the average SAT that admitted students get, those can be easily found on multiple different websites. So that's not really going to count as demonstrated interest. If you sign up for a webinar or a virtual event, but you don't attend, that's not going to count towards your demonstrated interest because like for example, when you join a webinar, they're going to have a list of all the students who log into that Zoom meeting or that webinar meeting. So they'll be able to track who signs up and who actually attends. And then finally, we talked about the importance of joining and following and being engaging on their social media. So if you just follow an account, but you don't really interact or really like anything, that's again showing that you're following, but you're not being engaging and you're not truly demonstrating that interest towards that particular school.
All right, I get to talk about building authentic relationships with your regional admissions officer. And I only have 2 slides for this, so that doesn't mean it's not important. It just means it's a shorter section to share this information with you. And I just wanted to start by saying that I was like a regional representative. I mean, I wasn't based regionally, but I traveled to visit high schools in the Boston area. And in other regions kind of in the Northeast for like, I don't know, upwards of 8 years. And I can tell you from that experience that when students came to your table to talk to you at a college fair and wanted to really make sure to make a genuine connection, I would put a star on the card they filled out and make sure that I knew their name. So when it came back to tracking my territory and looking at certain high schools, that I would be sure that I was like, kind of keeping their name in mind. And it even goes so far as to say, like, one student just stood at the table for so long because they knew it was a reach and they were just so wanted to do everything they could. And at the end of the day, we were using the wait list and I got to pick a student to come off the wait list. And I was like, this is the one. I don't think you can plan for that to happen, for that sort of persistence to pay off in that way. But it does sort of show you that those human connections can be impactful sometimes. So finding the regional rep is super easy. Most colleges now on their admissions websites have a like meet the staff or meet your counselor section where you can search by geography. So that's something that can be really useful to do if you have a question you needed answered. So like an example would be if you have, let's say there's a scholarship at a college that's nomination based, but you're not in a nominating region and the admission office can nominate internally. You might email your regional rep and ask them just to draw attention to your file and that could they consider an internal nomination. So that's one way to like take advantage of reaching out to your regional rep. Another way to do that is if you know you're going to be visiting campus, you might email them and say, are they going to be on campus when you're visiting? Like, do they have any time to meet with you? So that can be useful too. I think we've referenced this a couple times already, but just like having the contact be meaningful, it helps. It also helps when the contact feels like it came from the student. And it's not that parents or counselors shouldn't help make sure the email is professional and that we're teaching teens how to write professional emails or like, emails to these adults in their lives. But when you're on the receiving side of these, when they feel like a 50-something parent wrote the email, it doesn't, you can kind of feel it, and it doesn't get as much traction. Sometimes that can irritate the person receiving it. So just think about, how can it really be from the student? And I know sometimes with parents and student relationships, a parent might say, you really need to make this contact. I know this is a good idea. I know how to network. I want you to do this. And so you might need to nudge your child a little bit if they're not initiating it on their own, but try to let them make the draft, or take the lead on what is it that they really want to ask, so that it will feel more just authentic and genuine. We talked about college fairs, but I would add a couple things here, which is just like, if you talk to a college that you want them to know you had this point of contact, make sure you fill out the inquiry card, or have them scan your barcode, or whatever it is that you're coming in with. And then I also think that it's good to think about, what are good questions for college fairs. And if you've done any college visits, or you've been to any college fairs, you know that when you're on the other side of the table is the admission officer, and a student comes up to you and says, how's your biology major? Or they're like, how's your study abroad program? The answer from the rep is not going to be disingenuous, but it's always going to be, it's great. We have a great program. We go to lots of countries, or you can get in the lab right away in the first semester. So it can be hard to get really good information if you don't ask good questions. A question I prefer about academics might be, what classes are required in your core curriculum? Do you have a core curriculum? How flexible is it? Or, I have interest in biology, neuroscience, and public health. At your school, is this a place where I can combine multiple interests? Or does it matter what major I apply into? I don't think we're talking about that tonight, but those are some questions you might ask that are maybe a little bit more specific or personal. And then some follow-up after you make connections with admissions reps. On the next slide, we've got to touch more about that. So you can follow up with an email to your regional rep. You can follow up with, I suppose you could write an old-fashioned thank you note. That would probably be very impactful and very uncommon to do that. Or to leave something at the admission office to say thank you, like leave a note or something. And it helps. This is also, when you think about thank you notes, the other place that we see these come into play a lot in the admissions process is for your teachers who are writing recommendation letters for you. And this is a total tangent, but just putting a plug out there. When someone agrees to write for you and then actually writes you a recommendation letter, it's really nice to thank them. And this is the time of year where juniors are often asking teachers for recommendation letters. So don't hesitate. If there's students here tonight, don't hesitate to, after a teacher says yes to you, to send them an email and say, thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. I'll follow up this fall with more information. And for admission officers, if you meet them on campus and you write a quick note to say thank you, that's also a really good idea. I really just want to reiterate the point that this is a good skill for students to learn. A lot of things we work with students on in the admissions process are like life skills. So teaching them now and not doing it for them is a recommendation I'd have for parents. Likewise, filling out applications on their own, like contacting reps is a really good skill to build. A lot of students can be uncomfortable because you don't really practice this that much. But the more they build this skill now, it's going to come in really handy when they're in college and they need to email a professor or thank them for something. So hopefully these skills will be translatable. All right.
I really love this section about like building relationships and skill building, because someone actually in the Q&A asked, do you get dinged, or kind of like, does it hurt you if like you have an awkward interaction with an admissions officer at a college fair? And I'm like, if I had a nickel for every awkward interaction, let me tell you, like, it's very common. Like, if you're a student listening to this webinar thinking like, oh, like I'm intimidated by the admissions rep, I don't know what they're going to think of me, I feel like they're judging me. You are one of thousands of students that they see in their job. Like, and I don't mean to say that to you to be like, you're not special, but like, they're not going out of their way to like mess up your life and like taking notes on, wow, this kid was such a dud from St. Mary's High School. Like that's where Morgan used to work. So that is just something that I think it's zooming out a little bit, just to remember that, like, of course you're going to be, awkward, and you're going to think and psychoanalyze the interaction way more than the actual person in admissions. They have a lot of other things that they're doing with their job, and it's not something that they're going out of their way to like hurt you if you feel like you didn't put your best foot forward.
Okay, but also awkward can be authentic and memorable.
Yes, exactly.
So I don't
Yes,
think we
yeah.
should assume that it's always bad. Sometimes you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it was that person. I love them, right? And it can build
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah, and like people in admissions, there's like a generational divide, right? So there's a little more like what your friends might think was like cringy and terrible, and you want to like, oh, I never want to see my face again. The admission officer might have thought it was really cute and endearing, exactly like Morgan said. So I think just go in and be confident with who you are, and know that usually it's the positive interactions, like kind of what Morgan said with the star on the inquiry card. I would do similar things as well. Sometimes I'd write like notes on the back of the student's card if we had a conversation about something that was really exciting. So that's just something that I think I want to normalize. And even though at Pomona we didn't measure demonstrated interest, I was still a human being who appreciated students who like went out of their way to like make a connection with me, ask me how I'm doing. Sometimes they would even ask like, why did you choose to work here? Or like, what's one of your favorite things about working at Pomona? And even though we didn't measure demonstrated interest, I was more likely to advocate for students that I had these positive interactions with in my application queue of like 800 files, because I had that positive interaction. So it can definitely make an impression. All right, mistakes. I love talking about mistakes. So mistakes when planning college visits and how to avoid them. So first, just again, some norming, just as Morgan said, want to make sure that people understand when we're talking about visiting a college, what does that actually mean and what does that look like? So there's lots of different options that many colleges and universities put forward for students and families to get to know their campus more. I used to actually be the tour guide manager at Pomona, co-manager. My shout out to Carolyn, my other co-manager, and Taisha. And I loved running the tour guide program. It was such an amazing way to get to interact with students and families. Like getting to know the guides as well. They're an amazing representation of the school. And colleges and universities are really mindful of having lots of different students from different backgrounds with different academic interests. So that way, ideally, you can have as great of a visit as possible when you come and visit the school. I do think that there's a lot of benefit in some, and Jay's going to talk about this more, in exploring kind of beyond the official tour, because even though I was pretty, at Pomona, I was like, hey, tour guides, I want you to be pretty transparent and upfront with families if they ask you even like spicy questions. I don't want you to be thinking that you need to put a spin on every single thing. But in general, right, it is the admissions office. They do want their institution to the best to be put forward. So I do think there is value in kind of stepping outside of some of these formal opportunities when you have a chance to kind of ask people about like the real deal of a school. I think the tour is still a really good way to get that honest assessment. And in general, from my experience, if you ask tour guides like something like, what's something that you don't like about this school, or what's something that you think could be improved, they're usually pretty honest with their answer to you. The level of their candor may not be different. It's not like our president's crap, but or ideally, I think I would probably yell at my student if they did that. But again, you are going to get a little bit more of that is a paid job for many of these students who work as tour guides. So that's just something to be mindful of. I would say if you can, especially for some of your top schools, like schools that are really of big interest to you or that are close by, if you can do an open house, especially at some point in the fall of your senior year, it's so beneficial because you really do get a chance to, oftentimes the colleges put like all their eggs in the basket, right? Easter, very apropos. They really want to kind of put their best foot forward. They want, like, there are faculty who are there are student support services that are represented. So it's just a much more robust way to get to know a school. So if they offer any kind of like bigger visit days beyond a standard hour or hour and a half long tour, really highly recommend at least doing one of those at a school if it's convenient for you. If you are a student and family coming from an underrepresented background in higher education, so that could be you are first generation to college, maybe you're a low income student, maybe you're a rural student, veteran students, anyone who kind of isn't represented as frequently on college campuses. Many colleges are offer fly-in programs, both virtual and in person, for these populations to visit campus. Oftentimes there's like an overnight visit component to it, and a lot more real talk with students who kind of come from a similar life experience and background. And oftentimes also because these programs many of them are geared towards students who don't have as much financial ability to visit college campuses. There oftentimes is also travel assistance associated with them, either a full ticket cost included or some kind of stipend program. Then, of course, there are admitted student stays at colleges, but that's not demonstrated interest because you have to be admitted to be able to go to those. But definitely really recommend Admitted Student Day. I used to plan Admitted Student Day at Pomona. Super, super fun. It's one of the best ways to get to experience a campus in its full glory with all the bells and whistles. Okay, so for the mistakes, number one, waiting too long. Someone actually asked a question in the chat about this. I personally recommend going to visit a college campus sometime in your junior year, maybe even earlier, because just getting a feel for what a campus is like, because we have images in our mind of like movies, Hollywood, like, and to actually go and visit a campus and see what it's really like, especially if you haven't had a lot of experience on one, is a totally different vibe. And it also gets you really primed for a lot of the language and lingo and common things like what's the student to faculty ratio and what are office hours and terms and kind of just things that feel normal to us who work in the college world all the time. But when you're a student family, like diving into this, maybe for the first time, it can be very overwhelming. So I actually think doing tours is a great way early on, before you're even researching colleges or have your college list, just to kind of get that sense of familiarity. And I also recommend visiting a school of like a different type. So maybe visiting a larger flagship school that's close to you or a public school, as well as a smaller liberal arts college, because you may have in your mind, oh, I want to go to a bigger school because high school was small. I get that all the time. And then students visit big school, they're like, ooh, it was intimidating. So I think visiting campuses before you have that assessment of like, it's too big or too small, actually go and visit the sizes of the campuses before you make that assessment. Because sometimes I would argue people are a little premature in what they think that they want, and it's not actually what it is until they actually go. So just nipping that in the butt and having that clarity earlier than later is a good idea. Poor scheduling, this would happen all the time at the Claremont colleges because they're all right next to each other. They're in Southern California, it's 1 square mile, 5 campuses. People would try to do all 5 campuses in one, and that is just way too much information overload. All the tours blend together. You're exhausted, you're hungry, tired. You would have to be like, I think like just doing like Cliff Bars and like Celsius to make it through a day like that. So I really recommend doing 2 tours, 3 max if the schools are all really close to each other. But I would say 2 tours per day allow you to kind of have ample time to like meander off the beaten path. Maybe you meet a student, you can eat in the dining hall, you can kind of see where students hang out. That's a really, I'd say, helpful recalibration. You should research schools beforehand and not go in with like the really basic questions that are on the brochure, because that's kind of a waste of your time. You have a living, breathing, admissions officers and actual students who are on these campuses that you can ask anecdotal, qualitative stories that they can share that are going to be way more memorable and way more exciting for you. So do some research beforehand and don't just ask those basic questions. Document your visits. Morgan's going to talk about this a little bit more towards the end and how they're beneficial for your essays. And then I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but only visiting reach schools. If you're planning a college trip to Massachusetts and you only go to Harvard, that was a waste of money, because the chances of you being admitted to Harvard are really low. The chances of anyone being admitted to Harvard are really low. And there's amazing colleges in the area, in a place like Boston, the Boston area, to go and visit, that have a wide spectrum of selectivity. And many of them have probably a lot of similar things as to what Harvard has to offer in terms of resources, study abroad opportunities. So the more you broaden, I'd say, school ranges on your visits, the more you'll actually see that the likely and target schools on your list have more to offer than you're giving them credit for.
Yeah, so when a student gets such opportunity to visit colleges, it's a rare opportunity. So I'm going to be going over different types of questions and ways where you could best utilize your time while you're there. So first, through the formal college tours, it's really important to do your research ahead of time, so that you already know some of the basic information and coming up with a list of questions that you want to get answered while you're there, and where you can talk to students, where you could talk to admission staffs to get those questions answered. It's also really important for you to take detailed notes. You could either take a journal and write notes on it, or take your phone app and record anything that you think is important. But yeah, keeping notes is really important, because a lot of the times you could be taking that information later on to write your college essays in a while. It's also important to document your visit with pictures, with videos. On the Common Application, there is a question that asks, did you take a campus tour, and when was it? And I've worked with students who have no idea when they visited. So if you take a picture, if you take good notes, it'll be easy for you to gather that information. And then it's also important, while you're there, you're going to be meeting a lot of different people. You're going to be meeting current students. You're going to be meeting admission staffs. It's important for you to go introduce yourself. If possible, if you can get their contact information, their emails, their cell numbers, social media, whatever it is, so that you can continue talking to them after the visit is done, or if you have further follow-up questions, you have that contact information to do so. Right. Next is really going beyond the campus tour to best utilize your time. And one of the things that I always recommend students to do is go eat at the dining hall. Different colleges have different food options. Sometimes students have certain dietary restrictions. So it's really important to know, like, does this campus have the available foods for me? And also, am I going to enjoy eating the food here? I remember visiting some campuses when I was in high school, and the food looked like really, really bad cafeteria food, and I just could not imagine myself eating that for the next 4 years. So there were certain schools where I was crossing them off just based off of the food alone, because I know how important food is to me. Another thing you can do is you can email a professor ahead of time to see if you can sit in one of their classrooms, or if you go to a really big university with a large lecture hall type of classroom, you might be able to sneak in the back and sit in on a big lecture and really see like what it's like to be a student there, to sit in a big lecture hall and learn from a professor who's teaching. You might also want to grab a copy of the student newspaper that's usually posted all around campus, to see what are the current events on campus that's important. And again, just to take notes and have that valuable information for you so that you can then later on talk about it in your interviews, your essays, and so forth. Finally, you might also want to visit some popular student hangouts like the library or a coffee shop or a student center, just to see what are students doing on their free time. Because in some campuses, you'll see like students laying out on the lawn, and other places you might see students, playing frisbee with their friends, or in other campuses, students are just studying all the time. So depending on what you're looking for in a college, you might prefer one over the other. Okay. While you're on campus, it's also important to talk to some current students that are there. If you happen to know a current student, you could reach out to that person and ask, hey, I'm going to be visiting on this day. Is it okay if we, have a lunch meeting where we could talk about certain things? If that's not possible, usually the campus tour guide is a current student, so you can always ask that person. Or, most students are pretty friendly, so you can grab a random stranger off the street and ask them a couple questions. Some of the things you could be asking them are about their academic experiences, how much reading, homework, is there for a freshman? What is the teaching style like at a particular campus? What are some tips that they might give to you as an incoming student? You might also want to ask some questions about the campus life, like how are the dorms? Am I going to have like 3 roommates? Is it going to feel really crammed there? We talked about a little bit about the food, and then also like just what do students do on campus. You might want to ask about the social scene as well. For example, on the weekends, what are students doing? Do they stay on campus? Do they leave? Do they go back home? And then how inclusive are the communities? Is it easy for me to, join the rock climbing club or go to this organization and join and participate there? And then you might also want to ask them about some hidden insights, like what are something that you wish you knew before enrolling on the campus, and then what's something that surprised you the most, good or bad. And then finally, in this next slide, there's a bunch of different questions that you could be asking. I'm not going to go over all of them, but some of the questions that you could ask under academic questions are, how easy is it to change majors? In some universities, it's very easy. As long as you have good academic standing, they'll let you switch from one major to another major very easily. In other colleges, they're going to have restrictions. If you want to go into engineering, there might be another application. If you want to switch into the film, there might be another portfolio that you might have to provide. So it's important to know those information before you apply or even attend a certain university. You might also want to ask about any like fun or unique or new majors that the campus is offering, just so you know what are all the opportunities there to study. You could also ask some student life questions like how diverse the student body is, or what is the surrounding area like? What do students typically engage in? And then finally, you could ask some career questions. So usually at most universities, there's like a career center that you can go to and check out. But you could ask questions about, how many students can get a job after graduation? Are there internship opportunities? There's some universities that have co-op programs that actually help students find internships. So those are important things that you could be asking about. And then what the alumni network is like. Are there opportunities for me to meet alumni, or are there events where I can go and network with alumni?
All right, this is our last section. So, and then we'll do some Q&A after that. So this last, this is one slide. So if you're here and you've given us your attention, we are near the end. And if you came here tonight and you know College Essay Guide and you sort of know what we do, you might be thinking like it's about time to have a slide here that relates to essays. And even though I'm a college counselor on our team, we also are always thinking about the role of essays, the impact of writing and applications. And it just wasn't our focus tonight, but it's there and you should think about it. So after we're sort of thinking here about how visits can help contribute to your writing and applications. And sometimes I know it's possible to write really good essays without visiting. Like I understand that intellectually, that it is possible. I also believe students tend to have more authentic anecdotes, stories, connections to make, memories to share when they have been to a campus. So not only is it good for demonstrated interest, which was the first part of this presentation, but visits also are very helpful for producing fodder for essays down the road. Where in this first point where it's suggesting to collect specific details, I actually find it to be really helpful just to snap some photos on your phone and encourage students to do that so you're not like the embarrassing parent, if that's a thing for you, because it is for me. And I only have a 10-year-old. But I understand sometimes that can be awkward, but encourage students, just take some pictures. Do you see something that you like? I had a former student who had seen, I'm forgetting what college this was now, but maybe somebody knows. They had a patent wall. And so the student was really interested in that kind of, I don't know, scientific inquiry that could lead to a patent. And so they talked about seeing the patent wall. And those things you think you'll remember that you don't, I think it's good to remember what did that look like with just an easy photo on your phone. It also can be good just to take out your phone and in your notes app, just write something about what you love that you see and encourage your students to do that. Making personal connections is always going to be something that helps you show the college why you are a match. And we also often talk about how making that personal connection shows fit to major. So if I can say to a specific school why studying business there is a good fit for me, and then connect it to something I know that's happening in the business department or research somebody's doing that appeals to me, working in a lab with somebody, because you can find most of this on their website. Usually we're advising students to find a way to take what you want, look for what the school has, what they offer, and then draw some connections that are specific enough that it could not be about another college. In this, I mean, you might find that some of the ideas are reusable, but the examples should be specific enough that they're that school is really kind of the one that offers that, or that's where that professor teaches. And so you'll use all this. It might be for why major questions where you're talking about things you saw that were academic when you visited. And it also might be for why us essays. So things where you're just trying to show, I know what your school is all about. I like it, and it's a fit for me for these reasons. So this combination of things you can learn through your experiences on campus can really strengthen what you're saying in essays and writing and connect you to the place. I can think of it many students, but one especially comes to mind, where they learned about traditions on the tour that they took this fall and were able to weave in sort of excitement and personal connections to what they would like about the existing traditions, and then from their cultural background, what traditions they would like to bring and share with that school community. And it really just feels warm and inviting. And part of the end result of that is you're conveying to the college that you will be a good community member. And that is always a good feeling to leave the reader with. So, so that's a little plug for like, some of those supplemental essays and how visits can be helpful. I also like to say like visits can help you rule schools in or out. So a visit to a school that you decide to rule out can help you realize you don't need to write that essay because you're not applying anymore. So we're going to go into just a little bit of like answering if there's any more questions, we can do that. On this slide, we're just pointing out to you like all of the ways that we work with students and families and what we, how we provide information. So in the essential support category, this is like, if you ask, I don't know, like people who use our materials, like what are we known for or what do they benefit from? We get a lot of appreciation for all of the things Ethan has put out over so many years that are free resources that help students get through the process. And we know this process can seem murky, right? Like sometimes you're like, I don't know if I'm doing the right things. And so a lot of the blog posts we have, like if you type any, almost, not any, almost any topic and like college essay guy, you'll find information about that thing. I happen to love our letter of continued interest description and the interview preparation guide. Those are my two favorite free resources. If you read those and do what they say, you will be very well prepared. Other like mid-level support, we have lots of classes and options where there's like kind of mid-range pricing points to get like to attend a live session with our team or some of the sessions that Ethan leads on writing your personal statement. And then individualized support, which we won't spend a lot of time on here, but just to say like we work with students one-on-one with essay coaching, with college counseling. That's like a main part of my job. And then Matchlighters is like one of the things we're super, super proud of. And also I would say one of the things besides free resources that we're known for. And so each year we work with a group of students who apply to join our Matchlighters program. Last year it was around 700 students. And they get free college counseling or essay support from a volunteer counselor. So super excited. I just re-signed up for my Matchlighter student this year. And it's really gratifying when we know that like all of the work we do one-on-one with paying clients supports students who are low income and highly motivated. So that's like, that brings us some of that joy that we were talking about earlier. So. All right, what is my favorite two resources? I'll answer this one live. My favorite two resources are the letter of continued interest blog post, LOCI, and the interview guide is my other favorite one. I also will say, okay, if I can also, my favorite the thing I underutilize the most is the guides for specific schools. So like if you just Google like, I don't know if I'm going to give a good example, like how to get into Georgetown or Tulane or something. The tips there, like you should read that for every school you have. I don't do that a lot, but those other resources I send out all the time everywhere. I bet if you ask like 10 counselors, they'd have other favorites too. Okay, just a quick slide here on some of the things that we do in college counseling. This is probably not surprising at all. And I spend most of my day talking to students and families about all of these things. We talked about a lot of these things today, but that just gives you a quick look at what that support looks like. Oh, and that's it.
Thank you. And yeah, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind putting the link in the chat in case you are interested in receiving one-on-one college counseling support. We know hopefully this session, of course, like clarified the basics. You had some tips, things that you can take away with and apply to your own situation. But we also know that like individual needs and concerns and things come up. So it really can benefit lots of students and families to just have that listening ear, someone with perspective, with experience. Could be Morgan, could be Jay, could be our lovely colleagues, Renee, Scott, Adrian. We have a whole slew of people who are, Susan, a lot of people who are ready to help support you. We can go ahead and pause the recording for now and then do a recording for the Q&A section, which is right now. But we've also answered most of the questions I feel like that have come in.